In headphones, that's not really a significant concern. There isn't like parts that are exploding inside the headphone because of this perceived issue. It's not really a big deal.
Might be a slight puff of smoke, but
Well,
every so often I get the question, how reliable are your products?
That's a difficult one to answer now, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's easy and it's difficult at the same time.
Easy and difficult at the same time, yeah.
How reliable do you want them to be?
Right.
Very, yes.
So here's a simple explanation. If you buy a thing and it's a good working thing and you put it on a shelf, it'll probably work for a very, very long time if you never use it.
Assuming the shelf is at room temperature.
oh, right. Humidity controlled.
It's not in the middle of a desert. It's not a warehouse at 120.
Well, some things you do want to be in the middle of a desert. Like, you know,
Yeah.
we put like old aircraft in the desert.
That's true.
Store them there for 50
Well, it
years.
keeps them from what, corroding or what?
Yeah.
But now let's say you're using it. Maybe you're even abusing it. How long does it last in a little adversity in less than ideal conditions?
Yeah, well, you know what that reminds me of? Like back in the day, remember anyone who got a sports car, which back in the day, like there were Firebirds and Camaros, I'm talking in the 70s, right? And at the time they were like higher horsepower, right? But the thing with those cars is like you get into a Firebird that was 5 years old, right? That that somebody just beat on the first 5 years of its life, right?
Well, that's what it's made
and
for.
the rear springs were shot, the car's sagging in the back, right? The seats were like barely holding in.
Right.
And you could just tell, right? You look at it
the
when you
doors like falling off.
yeah. I mean, everything about it was like someone just beat the crap out of it. Because that car was made to do that, and so anyway, you get my point. It's kind of like it depends on usage case.
Well, yeah.
It really does on how things. Some people stored them. They kept them in the garage. They put 10 miles a year on them.
Right.
Complete opposite.
Yeah, it's in perfect condition.
Yeah, right. Like
Window stickers still in window.
Yeah, like brand new. Like still smells like new car 5 years later.
You could get a bit of that sampling bias.
Yeah.
Right. It depends on the market, the category, how it's used, who you're asking, and these types of things. But I think with headphones, for the most part, you get a little more uniformity than in cars. People aren't usually just beating on the thing really hard, throwing it at the wall every morning.
Yeah. Well, the classic
maybe.
example is when the GTR first came out, right? Nissan, they know what they're doing. They've been building cars for a long time, and they built a sports car, right? And they didn't, for some reason, expect people were just going to take it out and launch them and launch them and launch them and take out transmissions, but they did.
It was a bit of an issue.
Yeah.
It is a strange one because you would
They learned
think,
from it, though, because they did do changes to improve reliability.
I just wonder, like in Japan, what were they thinking? Like they figure you'll launch it once, maybe a month. They must have had a number in mind. Yeah. Like how would this be used? And these guys were launching them 100 times a day.
So that's exactly the thing. Typically, a manufacturer is going to make an estimation. How is this going to be used? How long does it need to last? Because you could pretty much make most things last forever, generally. It's just, it costs more money. So does it need to last 100 years or 1,000 years or 2 years or 6 months? And these are the questions you need to ask. And we could talk about how we design things and what we think is reasonable, because of course it's hard for us to speak of other manufacturers. But I think it's pretty straightforward. We sell pretty high-priced goods, and as a result, we try to make them as good as we can. We try to make sure that they last. We try to make sure it's the kind of thing you want to have in your life for a long period of time. And that tends to mean it needs to be reliable. You can't be worried about the thing blowing up and breaking on you. So there's a lot of things you could do to help solve these problems and mitigate the issues. But for us, we make almost everything. And this means we design, manufacture, iterate, and whatnot. We have an understanding of the process.
Yeah, I think we need to expand on that because if you're not doing this for a living, you wouldn't understand it. But it's kind of like having a built-in feedback loop.
Right.
You if there is a problem that you see occurring out in the field, right? You go straight to it. We can go straight to it. We can adjust production. We can adjust every variable in the headphone we control. And that's as opposed to like I could speak of manufacturers and even headphone manufacturers, they use other people's drivers, for example. They're running tweeters or woofers or speakers that are made by others. So they may not necessarily have the granularity to, that level of control. Things break. They don't know why, because they don't design the speakers, right? They could give feedback to the people that do, but it doesn't mean they can solve the problem because maybe.
Well, you hope.
Who knows? Yeah. I mean, ultimately, you got to figure out first of all why did it happen? It's basically what do you call it? It's a
autopsy. Sure.
It's a process to it.
Right.
It's not just like And if you see one thing here and there, it's not a biggie. But obviously, when there's a trend, that's what you're trying to avoid in all manufacturing is failure trends.
Right.
You know?
And it is a complicated thing because a lot of times you don't see the issues customers have in the field in your usage. So you need to figure out what happened. And that's actually harder than most people think. A lot of times you could look at someone else's product or failure or whatever, and you could say, okay, well, I see that this did happen, but why? Because you don't necessarily know what actually happened. The customer may not tell you the truth because they're trying to get it covered under warranty, and they don't want to say, hey, I did this thing that I know I shouldn't have done.
Yeah, the feedback isn't always accurate.
Right.
And, and it's going to happen no matter what the case be. And so, yeah, you almost got to be you got to spend the time to be a bit of a sleuth.
Yeah.
And, and put on your, what do you want to call it, hat? Your,
Yes. Well, except one time there was one guy, and he's like, yep, my son put a spoon through the driver. And he just said it straight up. It's like, oh, that is okay.
Yeah.
That's some solid feedback.
We had a couple people
get
that said things like that, but it's very uncommon. For the most part, people say, oh, I just woke up one day when it was like this, but there's like scratch marks all across the thing and a hole through it.
Well, and
maybe.
And you got to believe it.
Someone did
it.
it.
A lot of cases, that's how they perceive it. They're like,
it is possible, yeah.
It's like, well, I don't know what happened. And they probably don't, and that happens. I mean, you think about it, especially as the product gets more complex. And we always pick on automobiles because it's got 100,000 moving parts in it. Any one of them could break at any time. Customer driving a car has no idea why it happened.
Of course.
If as soon as your ball joint lets go and you're going, into the curb, you don't know why that happened. Even though the wheel was probably like this for 6 months, but you didn't pay attention to it because it slowly came on and just felt normal.
Just get used to it, yeah.
And all of a sudden the failure occurs, right? And it kind of goes with audio too. I see that with amplification. Mm-hmm. I see that there can be warning signs, and then sometimes there isn't.
Right.
And it just depends on how observative the user is, you know what I mean? And not only that, do they need to be? I mean, I feel like I'm thinking to myself, do I need to sit there and worry about this stuff all the time? I shouldn't have to.
That's a good question. And right, I agree. You shouldn't have to worry about these things. Occasionally, you get people that are concerned. There's this issue that they're having, and they're worried that it's going to cause more damage. For the most part, in headphones, that's not really a significant concern. The complexity is relatively low. There isn't like parts that are exploding inside the headphone because of this perceived issue.
Yeah.
It's not really a big deal.
Might be a slight puff of smoke, but
well, that's where it comes into. If you're using it outside its like design intent, aka like, plugging it into a 200-watt amplifier or something.
Yeah,
well, then you might have to worry.
Yeah.
Right.
You
that's
got it.
Different.
Man's got to know his limitations. Yes.
But as long as you're using it in a reasonable manner and it's not just like deafeningly loud in 180 degree Fahrenheit weather or something, very unlikely you're going to have severe issues. And trouble there is it does depend on the manufacturer of the product, their design intent, the customer, the conditions, and all these things.
It's complicated, and I mean, again, though, we are fortunate that because we produce the product in-house, the drivers and everything, that we're able to compensate and adapt to whatever the marketplace throws at us, really, in terms of usage. But for the most part, I mean, you think about it, we've got a 10-year history now with headphones. So we've seen 10 years of crazy things, right? With everybody. It's not just our headphones. Everybody. We see people bitching about all kinds of stuff. And I get it. It's like, oh, this shouldn't have done that. Oh, it's so expensive and all that. All the reasons why and rationale. But the reality of it is that everything breaks, right? I mean, at some point, for whatever reasons, and there may not be any rhyme or reason to it. There's all kinds of reasons. They may be all, but the reality of it is how much time can anyone spend on any particular problem? I mean, how do you explain that? How you get something in for repair. The customer says, "Oh, this is broke." You take a look at it. Service takes a look at it. They determine what's broke, and they fix it. And that's the end of it.
Right.
It's not, well, let's spend 5 days and look up the history. It's not like aircraft. Right, well, you got to go through with their what do you call ISO certifications, and if a part fails in an aircraft, well, there's probably 5 weeks of work to trail that part back to the original manufacturer's source, they'll go right down to the raw materials if they have to, because there's a paper trail for that. Yeah, but we're talking about thousands of people dealing with one problem because they don't want to see it happening, because there's thousands of people, there's hundreds of people on a plane that could die if this happens again. That's understandable. We don't have that in audio, right? If an amplifier or something fails, it fails. We fix it and we move on. It's not, and until you see a trend, it's not really an issue till it's an issue, I guess, is the best way to explain it.
Particularly with like the 1266, we have more of like a 911 approach, where it's like there's nothing revolutionary changing. It's minor refinements over time, and just keep refining the same thing, not like coming out with a vastly different model and starting from scratch again.
When it's built for speed, it's built for power.
I was talking about a car for the people that are unaware.
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah.
That could be unclear.
I guess you're right.
But they've been doing that for 60 years, making the same model, right?
Yeah.
Refining it.
All right. Yeah. So they know, the beauty of that is they're weeding out the problems over time. And we talked about this in past videos, where if you start from scratch with a whole new design, you also start with a whole new subset of problems too, right? You're going to run into something. Nobody could think of everything in a new design. You try to mitigate that.
Yeah, but once it's out in the real world, that's when you find out.
That's when people, you find out what you couldn't think of, and that's the way it works, and that's the reality of manufacturing. It's the reality of it.
Yes, and there certainly are a lot of things as a manufacturer you could do to eliminate issues, but you need to understand everything takes time and costs money. So there's a lot of things you could put on protections in place to mitigate issues that you think are very unlikely. So is it reasonable to do that? Is it reasonable to protect against something that you think is 1 in a million? Because usually it adds cost, complexity, time, effort, and in this case with headphones, a lot of times weight. So you can't really make the bulletproof headphone at a reasonable price, because there's other issues that get in the way.
Well, the thing is everything's, like we've talked about in the past, everything's a trade-off.
Right.
So, okay, let's say you do make something that's bulletproof. Well, I'm sure it's affecting the sound quality. And like you said, it's definitely affecting the comfort and weight, because now you've got, everything's bigger, heavier, thicker in order to make it bulletproof. It's kind of like they make these bulletproof cars for, presidents and stuff like that.
Actually, they're super compromised.
How much do these goddamn things weigh?
A lot.
One of those black SUVs they get, or they like 16,000 pounds or something. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
they barely
windows don't work. They don't go down. They're super thick, and you can't see through them.
You need special tires because it weighs like a bazillion tons.
And it's bulletproof.
Right.
But who the hell wants to drive that around all day long?
Yeah, you need to upgrade everything to handle the more weight. It gets terrible fuel economy.
Yeah, right. No acceleration.
Right.
It would be really, in the long run, it would be no fun to use.
But you're compromising everything for bulletproofness.
Right. And that's what it was designed to do. Right. That's its design criteria. People in the car must be safe from quick-moving projectiles.
So it always comes down to, as a designer, as a manufacturer, you need to understand how it's going to be used and what you should do to protect it for these use cases. But sometimes you're going to get it wrong, and that's what you see out in the wild. Sometimes you see manufacturers making a product and they get it wrong. They miss something, or maybe they overbuild it in some manner, and it's a worse product for it, or it's more expensive to make, or something like that. You see this all the time. Almost every product has faults and flaws, and sometimes
therefore
they're minor.
Every product can be improved upon.
Pretty much always you could improve almost anything, and that's a tricky concept, because if you don't make everything, a lot of times the consumer doesn't see this side of things. But if you're buying in something, if you're not manufacturing this, or if somebody else is designing for you, you're working around faults and flaws from another manufacturer.
Right, you're dealing with literally thousands of outside vendors. I mean, it depends on the size of the manufacturer, but you're dealing with other people making parts for you that you assemble to make the whole.
Yep.
And that's the way it works. I mean, I remember once I was laying out just looking at like the cost of like a simple thing like a power cord, because we make cables, right? So you look at the parts count on a power cord, and people think nothing of it. It's a power cord. It's got a plug on each end.
Does it cost $1 or something?
Right. But when you make it from scratch, right? I'm talking like the conductors and the insulations and the outer jacket material, and spec the twist on it, right?
The
That's
printing even,
the printing on it, the color of the printing, the type of printing, how it's printed, all the factors. That's just to make the cable, just the cable.
Right.
Now you've got someone making connectors if you don't make your own, right? Which connectors do you use? How much do they cost? Where do you buy them from? What color are they going to be? How do you strain relief the connector? And I mean, you look at the parts count on something like a power cord, and then you got to talk about packaging, and you could be at 15, 16 vendors to make one power cord.
And you're thinking it's like, well, it's one
But
part,
people look
right?
at it and they see a
It's
power cord,
right.
it ends. But you don't think about how many people are involved to come together to make the components that make up that one product. And yeah, it's crazy.
Well,
when
can you
think about
imagine
it.
making something actually complicated, like
No.
the space shuttle?
Well, that's gotta be
When you got a
crazy.
million parts.
Yeah, and you got to control that
Yeah.
to such
And
a
they all
high
need to be
level.
perfect?
Yeah.
Oh.
So I think people are getting it.
Yeah.
Where it's like there's two different extremes to this, right? You've got the widgets on one end that just slam out a gazillion of them a year, and if they break, you just give them another widget.
Oh, right. Razor
and you
blades.
got ultra high reliability on this end, like space shuttles and automobiles and airplanes, where a failure is not acceptable in any level, And somewhere between lies the rest of us.
Right.
I think that kind of sums it up.
Vaguely.
Yes, vaguely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's, of course, pros and cons to each approach. It doesn't mean that handing something off to a vendor is bad or good, but it does mean you give up something. You give up some understanding. And sometimes it works out fine because sometimes this manufacturer or vendor has an extreme amount of understanding and they make the product way better than you ever could. But it tends to mean that you have integration issues. So it doesn't always make the product worse, but it doesn't always make it better either. And that's sort of the thing that we face a lot of times in our field. We have people that they have expectations and understandings from other manufacturers. And if other manufacturers are doing things differently, you're going to have different issues, different problems, different adversity to face in your manufacturing process. So it's a little strange, but yeah, people always ask, how's your reliability? Things like that.
Yeah.
That's a complicated one, but it seems like for the most part, people are basing their assumptions on other manufacturers. And
Their experiences.
their experience,
Yeah.
right.
They had a headphone from X company fail. Therefore,
Therefore, all of them
all
like
of them
this
are susceptible
fail.
to that. Yeah, same. And I get that, but you can't really lump all companies into the same boat. It doesn't work like that, And there are some that have more control over
Well,
their destinies than others. And
I
that's
mean,
just the way it is.
What comes to mind is Apple. They're always held to a higher standard due to higher price and everything. And they make mistakes all the time. And you're like, how are they making? They could throw like 20,000 engineers on designing a button, and they still get it wrong from time to time.
And
right?
same with, they've had problems with Intel chips and
Well, yeah.
graphics chips. And again, it's not their fault.
Yeah,
They don't
right.
make the chip.
Right.
They
They had a
and,
falling out with NVIDIA for over a decade now because of that.
Yeah. Well, and it might be their fault. I guess at that point they're pointing
Use
a finger
case.
at each other.
Yeah, it's
right?
like,
you didn't
yeah,
heat sink it well
yeah,
enough.
right.
You're overclocking. You're doing this. You're doing that. And then they're like, oh no, you said we could do that. So you could see where a pissing contest. And it doesn't solve the problem though.
No.
In the end, the consumer, us, has a bad laptop or a bad computer
Right.
for it, right? And it's bullshit. We're calling bullshit. It's like this goddamn thing shouldn't have. I get that.
See,
right?
I see you
that.
have some personal experience here.
Yeah.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
right.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Actually, all three of us had our MacBooks fail
But
in the same way.
Yeah, but you know what? Now that I'm looking at it, seems like the stuff's getting more reliable, isn't it? Like you see less of that.
Yeah. Well, they're doing everything in their own design now.
Yeah.
They're changing what fails because of the dramatic differences in manufacturing.
Yeah.
But yeah, to summarize, we tend to think that things shouldn't fail when feasible. And
We don't
anytime
want them to.
of course, anytime we see something with an issue or a failure, we try to figure out why it failed, what we could do to prevent it in the future. And sometimes the answer is you can't do anything to fix this.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes that's just the
There
truth.
is no answer.
But sometimes you figure out a little additional insight, and you could use this to improve the product in the future and make sure this doesn't happen again.
Well, that's the most important thing you can do as a manufacturer is continuous improvement.
Right.
It's important, and it's ultimately why we just announced our 10-year warranty a month or so ago. That was the whole idea of it. We're saying we're so, confident of our current designs that when you buy a brand new headphone, you get 10-year warranty on it.
Yeah.
And we could do that. When we feel very confident we could do that because we know we have 10 years
You got the
our
data.
10th anniversary, yeah, we have the data. We can see the trend, and we know that our products are quite reliable out there. And, you know, I don't know if they're space shuttle reliable.
Oh, well.
But
Actually, that had
Depends
some,
on your perspective.
That
on that
also
one.
had
well,
some
that's
problems,
true. I guess, yeah, that's true. Yeah, but there you have it.
Yep.
All right, well, everyone, I hope that answers questions on that front. Email us, call us if you need anything. Thank you for watching. Thumbs us up. Take care.